This is part 4 of the lecture to accompany Chapter 17 in your textbook. I highly recommend you read Chapter 17 as it contains information you may find helpful, but I don't have time to address in this lecture. You may pause and replay this video as often as you need to. Okay, let's finish this lecture. So far we've looked at the different ways people are persuaded through ethos, which is the credibility of the speaker, and logos, which is the logic and reasoning employed by the speaker. The last way in which people are persuaded is possibly the most effective way. We are going to look at emotional appeal, also known as pathos. Even though we like to think of ourselves as rational creatures, we are really just big bags of emotion. Despite our best efforts to listen rationally and make decisions with logic, in the end we often believe, think, and do things because of how we feel about them. So a good speaker will look at the topic, look at the audience, and decide what emotions would best help the audience be persuaded. Maybe you want them to feel angry about something, or to feel compassion for someone, or pride in themselves, those kinds of things. All emotions can be big factors to motivate people. Plus, think about a speech you would want to listen to that would make you want to change something. Would it be full of simply a bunch of facts and statistics that might make sense but not be particularly interesting or stimulating or personal? That's not very persuasive, is it? There are things you should definitely do to appeal to the audience's emotions and make them more amenable to your thesis. Using emotional language, give them examples that stimulate emotions, help them relate to your topic. Speak in a way that lets them know you truly believe in what you say. Feel the things you want your audience to feel. Having said those things, you need to be very careful not to manipulate or coerce your audience. Your feelings should be sincere. Your agenda should be in the audience's best interest. Emotion is a powerful persuasive tool. Don't misuse it. I really believe that logic, evidence, and reasoning are the basis for any good argument. Emotion is simply the icing on the argument cake, so to speak, the thing that seals the deal. It's unethical and sometimes dangerous to use emotion in place of logic and reason. For instance, think of an angry mob. They're not thinking. They're only feeling, so there's no rationality in an angry mob, just emotion. Remember the power of words and use them wisely. Okay, we've talked about the ways in which speakers put together arguments. Now we're going to discuss how people mess up those arguments. That's fallacies. Now, fallacies are incorrect arguments. There's something wrong with the argument itself. It could be that the reasoning is faulty, or the evidence is incorrect or inadequate. There are all kinds of ways to mess up an argument, and the more you know about fallacies, the better you're going to be at spotting them in other people's arguments and avoiding them in your own arguments. There are actually people out there who intentionally use fallacious arguments because they might sound good, but in the end they want to deceive you. But more than that, most people just use them because they don't know any better. So I'm going to discuss a few of the most common fallacies. There are many more than I address today. Hasty generalization. Here's an example right here. And if you recall, we talked about this before. Hasty generalization is coming to a conclusion on the basis of too little evidence. In this example, the speaker is using one female Navy captain being relieved of duty as proof that women are unfit for military command. However, in order to truly prove that claim, the speaker would need other examples, statistics that show that this is a common occurrence, and testimony from recognized experts in the field that support the claim. And frankly, I don't think that this person can find all that evidence. And I don't want you to be guilty of this. Always have enough evidence to support the claims that you're making. Then we have something called an invalid analogy. Now, this is a pretty amusing example. Employees are like nails. Just as nails must be hit on the head to get them to work, so must employees. Obviously, the speaker is saying that employees and nails are essentially alike, but really, there's not enough similarity between employers and nails to prove that what's true for one is also true for the other. Now, make sure when you're using analogical reasoning that the two things are similar enough that your argument is valid. Then we have the bandwagon fallacy. Now, when I was a teenager, my mother used to say to me when I wanted to do something my friends were all doing, "Well, if your friends all jumped off a cliff, would you want to do that too?" That's because mothers are well aware of the bandwagon fallacy that assumes that something is good or correct simply because a lot of people think so. Although you can certainly use popularity or the rule of majority as a piece of evidence, if that's all you've got, you don't have enough evidence to prove your claim. Because frankly, as it says in this example, 60% of the people support him. Well, guess what? 60% of the people could be wrong. So you need other corroborating evidence in order to prove this statement. Red herring. Oh, one of my favorite fallacies. Often, when a person is unable or unwilling to defend their position, they divert attention to something else. In this example, the person doesn't address the actual topic, which is their own possible political corruption. Instead, they start talking about improving the quality of life, probably hoping that people are going to respond to that and move away from the topic that they don't want to discuss. Again, this is usually done intentionally by people who probably don't have good arguments to defend their position. You'll see a lot of this on Sunday morning political talk shows like Meet the Press or Face the Nation. Although the moderators try to get politicians to directly answer their questions, politicians tend to be really good at diverting to other topics and rarely answer anything directly, preferring instead to move the topic to something they can answer or want to answer. That's what a red herring is, so watch out for those and don't do them. Ad hominem is one of the worst fallacies you can commit. Unfortunately, it's very common in politics these days. So common that we tend to think it's okay. But it's not. It's one of the most unethical fallacies because it's almost always done intentionally, where you attack a person's character or the person themselves rather than dealing with the real issue. In this example, the real issue is whether the mayor's proposal to end hunger will work, not whether the mayor is wealthy and doesn't know what it's like to be hungry. And anyway, what does that have to do with whether their proposal is going to work or not? The proposal should be looked at apart from any opinions you might have about its author. Trashing the opposition in this way is extremely unethical, and I expect better of you as a speaker. Now, when you're 3 years old and your mom gives you a choice between a peanut butter sandwich or a tuna fish sandwich for lunch and tells you those are your only choices, that's fine. But as adults, we come to realize that very few things are either or, black or white. But when someone uses this fallacy, what they're doing is cutting out all the other possibilities that exist and forcing us to choose between two extremes. The government must either raise taxes or eliminate services for the poor. Really, there's not something else in there that could possibly be a better alternative. This is a popular tactic in issues like abortion, global warming, Obamacare. The extreme ends of the spectrum say you're either for us or against us when there are obviously many ways to think about an issue. Don't assume there are only two sides. There are always alternatives. All right, so we talked about some of the most common kinds. There are a lot more fallacies than the ones I just discussed. Unless you undertake a serious study of rhetoric, you probably won't ever know about them all. But I can give you some tips to help you create good arguments while avoiding fallacies. If you follow this advice, you'll probably be fine. First, write your claims, including your thesis statement and all your main points, as clear, understandable, defendable statements. Then do your due diligence when it comes to research. Put in enough time and effort to find good sources with reliable, verifiable information. And find enough evidence to prove your points. Don't be guilty of hasty generalization. My advice is for every main point you should have at least an example, a statistic, and some testimony. It's not always possible, but it's a good rule of thumb. Also, make sure when you state something as a fact that it actually is a fact. It's okay to have an opinion or to state the opinions of others as long as the audience knows the difference. And finally, emotion is a powerful persuader, so use it judiciously. The basis of your argument should be good evidence and reasoning. Emotion is the icing on the argument cake. This concludes our discussion of Chapter 17.